Building, Safeguarding Education Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Apologies, please.
We have apologies this morning, Chair, from Mr Spencer, Mrs Burnett Faulkner, Mrs Edgeler, Mrs Jessel and Mrs Pardacey.
Thank you. Any other apologies from anybody else who may have passed them? No. Thank you. Okay, minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of February 2025. They have been circulated. Any comments on them? Does anyone like to propose them as a true and accurate record? Thank you, Steve. Shall I move the minutes that they're passed? Thank you. Okay, we'll go straight into the agenda. School Attainment 2024. Report of a Cabinet Member for Education and Send. Jonathan.
Behind every Cabinet Member is a damn hard-working team, and I'm lucky enough to have such a thing. And they've come in force this morning as well. Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to bring these reports this morning. So the first report is in relation to the attainment performance of schools across Staffordshire. And when I talk about schools, of course, I do mean maintained by the council or academies. It is also important at this point to highlight the changed role and responsibility of the County Council and School Attainment and Progress. I'm sure we don't need to rehearse, and indeed the report highlights the proportion of maintained schools and academies. The Council no longer has a duty to provide or fund school improvement. These duties are for those to be governed by schools. Our role is to champion high standards of education and to understand the performance of our schools within Staffordshire. The report does set out the risk analysis undertaken, which includes performance information and other information we hold, including inspection outcomes, attendance, and of course exclusions, which I'll be presenting in the following paper this morning. The report presents the performance outcomes of each stage of education from our early years foundation stage and the good level of development through to the end of the statutory school age and GCSEs. There is a breakdown by particular groups and districts, and you'll see that within the paper. I understand that there was a request to provide a view over time, and you will see that for some areas performance remains lower than pre-pandemic levels. Others are now broadly in line, and although GCSE performance in English and Maths at grade 5 or above is higher than before the pandemic, this still remains below the national average. I know that you've all read the report, of course, and so I will pause for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. You'll be aware that the Chairman's not here today. He's had a hospital procedure, so that's the reason he's not here, but he's sent some questions in. So I'm going to open with 2 questions from the Chairman, then pass it out to the committee to ask their questions. The Chairman says that he found the attainment report a little confusing, with too many variables: primary, secondary, local authority, academies, advantaged, disadvantaged children, national, regional, girls, boys, reading, writing, arithmetic, CIC, CP, CIN, standard attainment, progress 8, 8 to 8. Anyone would think that this was done to confuse. Is any of this statistically significant? And that's from the Chairman.
The quality of information, certainly the quantity of information, is certainly not to confuse anybody. It's just to give a very clear picture of every stage of the education. In terms of statistical significance, we haven't got the information whether it is statistically above or below national expectations.
Thank you. And the second question from the Chairman: if we have significantly fewer academies than the national figure, and national academies are performing better, in some cases much better, are academies simply better schools? Is it due to their business approach of being able to hire and fire easier and attract and retain the best teachers? If so, should we be moving to academisation with a greater speed and enthusiasm across our county?
I'll pick up the questions. I don't want to kind of correct the chair, but I am going to. So as far as Staffordshire goes, the proportion of academy schools in Staffordshire is just over 75%. Nationally, it's much lower than that. And when we look at secondary schools, then we're at 90% of our schools in Staffordshire are academies. So from that perspective, the majority of our schools are academies already. And so therefore, in terms of the question around whether academies perform better or not, when you look at the overall performance in Staffordshire, you would suggest that actually there isn't evidence to support that. What I would say is, though, that what we do have is we have a scale of performance that we have academy schools who perform significantly better than what's looking either regionally, nationally, or from a statistical neighbour. But similarly, though, if we look at the performance of other academies, they're performing significantly worse. What we're presenting is what the picture looks like across Staffordshire for the average Staffordshire youngster. And so that the indication would suggest that actually it's not around whether an academy is better or not, because the performance doesn't suggest that.
Morning, everybody. Good to see you. A very comprehensive report, and I for one like the data, so it's appreciate that. I'm just curious to know. I have an opinion, but what are you happy about with the data, and what are you not happy about with the data? Which aspects are you particularly concerned with, and do you have any key performance indicators to measure against?
So in terms of the positives, I'd certainly pick out the start, the children's education, so good level of development. I think the teaching of reading is a strength, certainly teaching of early reading and phonics. I think Key Stage 2 reading, again, is a strength, not just at the expected, but I think the gap to national for the highest standard as well is the closest to national as well. And I think as well, the performance of our female pupils, certainly at primary level, are the strengths. In terms of the weaknesses, unfortunately, it is Key Stage 4, and also males at Key Stage 2 as well, and also males at Key Stage 4, and also the performance of disadvantaged pupils throughout.
Thank you very much. I think that's absolutely right, and I guess the follow-up part to that was, what is the expectation? Because we can look at this data and see below or above or whatever, but where it's below, what is the plan? What is the strategy? I know other local authorities, for example, that support schools with writing, and I know that writing is an area that isn't particularly strong. So are there any plans for that? And are there any plans to clearly state to the schools, this is the expectation in Staffordshire, this is what we want the average to be for 25-26?
So we share all the information with our schools in a variety of forms. I think the expectation for our schools is not one that we say you have to hit a certain level. We give them the national, the statistical, and also the regional averages as well. And I think for the context for their school, achieving the national average may be underperformance for some, whereas it may be, exceeding what we would expect in some of our schools. Where we identify weakness, whether it's in a subject or specific age range, we don't sort of have a strategy to improve that. That's for the schools and the trust to identify the weaknesses in their schools and to address that themselves.
But I assume you're aware some local authorities do, and I just wonder if there's any kind of consideration of what they offer and how we can potentially work with them to support the schools. And coming back to the point, I'm not suggesting for a moment that we set individual targets for schools, but what I would have thought was that we could be setting average targets for Staffordshire. So whilst recognising that some will be above and some will be below, I think it's very hard for a sort of scrutiny committee to consider whether these are good, bad or indifferent if we're only comparing to national, for example. What I think would be useful is if we set our stall out and said this is the target for Staffordshire in, for example, 25-26.
Councillor Price.
Yeah, thank you. The problem we have, particularly around the academy system, is we have very few levers now. So we can ask and put expectations of where we would like to see reading and writing levels. But actually the tools that we have as a local authority with the team that we have, with no funding for school improvement, it makes it very difficult. So we need to work with our schools and encourage our schools to improve, as I said, working alongside them. I just wanted to quickly raise another point as well. One of those areas that I'm the most concerned about at the moment, and you mentioned it earlier, and we talked about one of the challenges, is the gap around those disadvantaged pupils and seeing that gap increase. It is a national problem, and the state of the high needs block and the work that we're doing around SEND as well is not helping. We're doing everything we can, but with the challenges we face and the sheer numbers that we find ourselves under, is certainly not helping that situation as well. Of course, you know we're doing a huge amount of work around EA, PDR, CEDIS model, school improvement, building special school places, trying to work around making sure schools are more inclusive, but this all takes time and there's a huge amount of work being done by the County Council. But just to reiterate, we're keeping a very close eye on that. It is a national issue, but I don't want to see that gap increasing with those most vulnerable learners, because we really, really need to give them the best start in life, and they certainly, you know, they need to have as much support as we would give a mainstream child with no difficulties.
I've also included on paragraph 30, certainly for primary phase data, where it varies by district as well. So I take your point as a Staffordshire expectation. I think then you could argue, could you do a district expectation? And that's where, for me, it probably boils down to, if you were going to set a target, it would generally have to be a school target, and then you'd probably have to average that. I'm not sure how meaningful it would be.
I mean, as Director of Education in the Archdiocese of Birmingham, we've got 236 maintained schools and academies across 13 local authorities, and we do set average expectations. You know, that's what we're moving to, and when I say we are moving to that, understanding that there will be differences. But the point that I'm making is that if we are going to really scrutinise performance and improvement, then I find it difficult to understand how we can do that unless you guys are saying, you know, this is the average expectation that we're saying. Now, I understand that you haven't got money for school improvements and all that stuff, and nor is the Archdiocese, for example. But what we can do is that there are levers to support that. So, for example, as CEO and ex-CEO in a Staffordshire Academy, I used to attend Tim's regular meetings, and they were very useful. You know, if we were setting absolute clear targets, you know, and saying to the schools, this is the expectation, and when you, and this is a really good thing you do in terms of grading the schools each year, including academies, you know, that gives something constructive to work off. You know, for example, if you are considering a school and your target is X for lowering the gap between non-disadvantaged and disadvantaged, but that school hasn't achieved that, that could be highlighted in that report. And believe you me, school leaders would focus in on that as a result of that. I just think that maybe we're missing a trick in terms of, yes, they've got to be responsible for it, but if they also think you as a local authority, we as a local authority are focusing in on that, then I think that may help your cause. And also sharing of best practice as a result of that too.
Yeah, I take the point, Steve, and I guess the response is around the our setting out of what the local authority average is, what the regional average is, what the performance looks like in terms of the local authority interactive tool, our performance against all of those. The challenge we've got and is to say for some schools, actually, they should be high performing. And their Progress 8 should be some of the best Progress 8 scores in the country, because the challenge around Progress 8 was never around those schools that are challenged with attainment. Progress 8 was around those schools that get high attainment. The issue we've got is we've got so much variation across the county to say to start to say to a school, well, actually, we would expect all schools to be at the national average. That is an expectation that we would set out. But that isn't good enough, though, because for me to say to, and we will use some of our, schools that are well above the national average, to say that we expect you to be at the national average just does not cut it. And so I think what we're saying is you've got to be looking at your performance compared with what we're providing. And actually, is your performance good enough compared to all of that? Now, we're not sitting here to say that we think the performance is good enough. It isn't. Because actually what the data tells us, and coming back to the chair's question, is that as youngsters in Staffordshire go through the education system, their performance gets worse. What we don't see is the narrowing of the gap. So even when youngsters are disadvantaged right at the very beginning of their education journey, so even in the early years, although overall it looks really positive, actually the disadvantaged youngsters don't get a good deal compared to the like nationally or regionally, and that gap never closes, it gets wider. The challenge we've got, though, is that looks very different in lots of different schools. That we talk about disadvantaged youngsters. We've got a number of programs that are taking place in terms of the raising attainment of disadvantaged youngsters. We've got a program that talks around the relational and restorative practice, which is about saying, come on, set your expectations higher for all of these, and we've got a number of schools, 70 schools going through those programs. So I think we are clear around what those expectations are, but I don't think the point around saying, so what is it that we expect, I'm not sure we can say there is that clear expectation for all schools, because it will be different depending on where you are.
Having been a former school governor, my view is never about what GCSEs people got. It was levels of improvement from the time they started at school all the way through that system. And if they weren't doing it, and the school wasn't achieving, this way I always looked at it as a school governor. And I know my head teacher at the time was very similar. I'm going to move on now to somebody else. So, Councillor Wiseman, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I echo what the Chairman has just said in terms of progress. This is my layman's understanding, but if it's about progress, then we could measure schools equally by looking at the progress that pupils make from when they start school to when they finish that school. And if that is the case, and I'm looking to you to say whether that is true or not, if that is true, then can't we set a standard, not maybe a sort of standard across the board, say you need to have progress 8 by 3 grades or whatever. But it could be the case that we look at an average progress for pupils across each school, and that they should be reaching a certain progress by the point which they leave. Is that possible to set? That's my first point, and then I've got a couple of questions afterwards. Thank you.
In terms of primary school, they only have attainment performance data now. The progress figures were removed with the Key Stage 1 SATs when they were removed, so we haven't had the progress figures to show that progress from year 2 to year 6, so we no longer have that information.
For secondary school, because that's where the issue is actually, or most of the issue is here.
So the only progress figure we have is for the Progress 8 figure, which measures the performance from the end of Key Stage 2 to the end of Key Stage 4. So there's that progress figure which is in the report.
And if we have that data, which I think shows that there is an issue with progress, can we not say for the 50 odd, is it 50 secondary schools that we have, 50 something, that they all need to reach a specific progress target? Or is that not possible?
So the target would be for them to reach 0 as the progress score. So for progress 8, we have 16 of the 56 high schools, secondary schools above 0. So we have 40, obviously maths, sorry, 40 below that 0 figure.
So if we set 0 as the target for all of our secondary schools, how would that be an issue, or would it not?
I think that 0 is already there for them. I think they understand that that's the benchmark.
If we set that as Staffordshire, I think that's the question that the gentleman over there made.
I take your point. But I think from a school leader point of view, that is what the minimum they would be aiming in terms of their progress 8 anyway. Yeah.
So sorry to keep coming back and forth, but I'm just trying to explore the point, because listening to the gentleman over here, and sorry I don't know your name, but Steve, I got quite excited, and I felt that we were missing a trick a little bit, because there's a lot of data here and it's really great so that we can see it. But it feels like we need to be, it's a bit like what I think some of the issues are actually within schools and education here in Staffordshire is that there's something around ambition, and it's just not quite there. And I feel that, and I felt it at school, because it wasn't a long time ago since I was at school. I felt it there, and I think we should be doing more than that. In Staffordshire, I appreciate we don't have a huge amount of levers. That's the wrong terminology, but a lot of levers to try and affect change. But if we did have some targets, then at least we could try and aim towards those, and that might be helpful to us all, especially to hold the authority to account.
So, I think we need to be clear around responsibility, accountability, and to some extent, the challenge is it's not about setting the target, but what does that target mean? And I'm kind of coming back to Steve's point. And what are the levers? So those schools that achieve the target, great. Those schools that don't achieve the target, so what? So there's a question there. There's a question around role, responsibility, and it's quite clear in the support and intervention in schools guidance around the local authority's role, particularly where we have academies. And so it's again in terms of the regions group and their responsibility and their discussions with academy trusts. And so are we then saying to the departments, so that this is what we're expecting, so are you holding them to account for a Staffordshire target regions group? Is there a trust target? Okay, so we've got schools and multi-academy trusts. Is that the target? Steve, you talked about the diocese target, and is that the target? Or is it the school's own target? And so the question for me, I think it's about, I take everybody's point around kind of that ambition. Our expectations are that all youngsters do as well as they can and do better than they should. And so therefore, by actually putting some kind of artificial target, is that good enough? And what the point that we're making is, for us in Staffordshire, when we look at that performance, it isn't good enough. The challenge we've got is some schools will be saying, well, we're doing fine, thank you very much. And so therefore then we need to be digging underneath that to say, okay, so which schools is it? Which youngsters aren't? And how do we address that? And it's certainly one that we will take away, and we talk regularly to schools about the performance information, and this is your performance information. It's not Staffordshire's, it's not ours. This is an amalgamation and a building up of what's going on in Staffordshire schools. And if you think that's good enough, then quite clearly when we're looking and we're comparing ourselves with other local authorities and in terms of those rankings, again, it's quite clear. We're in the A's and B's in terms of Key Stage 1 early years, and then when we move through to end of primary and to secondary, we're moving into C's, D's, which therefore it says, okay, so what is it then that is working or isn't working? Because I have to say that, that this performance information has looked very similar for a considerable number of years. And so for me, it's not about academies, because pre-academies, this was the kind of performance indicator. It's not changed. And we've now got significant schools who are academies. And it's still in that same picture. So that there is a particular challenge. But my question is, if we set the target, so what then? What is it that's going to happen as a result of that?
I mean, I'm going to chuck that question back at you, because the reality is that my second part to this was that first is targets, because I was excited by the point that Steve was making, but also there's a lot of data on here, but there isn't that much information about what we as a local authority and a local education authority are actually doing to address the points or the issues that are kind of highlighted within the report. And I think I understand this is probably about data, so we can look at it. But I think we get more excited about if there are, let's say if this happened in children's services and we saw red and amber on here, we'd be asking for an action plan and we'd be getting really quite concerned and so on, rightly so. But this is happening in education in Staffordshire, plain to see, especially in secondary education. I would like to see a proper action plan that says, what are we going to do to address it? And then we can scrutinise that and have a look at whether that action plan is sufficient. Whether that's within our remit or not is a good question. But we are a local education authority. We should have some remit over the quality of education. Thank you.
So we can certainly write actions, but actually the delivery of all of those actions sit within schools and academy trusts, not within the local authority. I know Councillor Price talked about we've come in force today. I think that the point we haven't come in force today, this is the size of the school improvement team that sits within the county. So you're looking at it, there is nobody else. So that's, you know, Charles is the school improvement officer. So that's one aspect to it. The other aspect to this is around the regulator, Ofsted. Now, one of the things we haven't talked about, and you know, Charles can give you the details in terms of there's a regulator part of this that talks about good and outstanding schools. And for the first time, I want to say in over a decade, the number of schools that are judged inadequate is the lowest it's ever been. So we've got one school that, and we know that Ofsted have removed that overall judgment now, but actually the number of schools rated good or outstanding is the best that it's ever been as well. Yet when we look at the performance indicators, those performance indicators don't necessarily reflect that, but from an inspection perspective, then we've got schools who would say, but look, Ofsted are telling us we're doing a good, if not better job for the youngsters that we're currently serving.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the report and the statistics, which not quite as enthusiastically as Steve, but I do welcome. There's a huge amount of information there that is condensed into this report. I'm grateful to Tim for reflecting historically on the pattern here, which is a very stubborn one about the decline in overall and sort of average performance looked across the whole sector. So I won't go over that again, but I just want to raise a question or two about some of the sort of parallel issues here that are kind of linked with it. First of all, the fact that our overall performance declines from the top quartile to the third and fourth quartile, I would expect this to have an impact on the way in which pupils proceed from school into further training, higher education, and so forth. And it'd be interesting to compare our rates, success rates, if you like, at that level with our performance in the lower quartiles towards the end of schooling. Does it have an impact in that way? The other thing is, as I'm aware and others are aware, the government is introducing this RISE programme to bring about proactive school improvement, and the initiative is very much now with the regional directorate and the teams that they're going to be promoting. Is the local authority seeing this as a partnership, or is it a rivalry, or is this something that is in effect going to make school improvement programmes in local authorities redundant? It seems to me that the government, so the Department for Education, is now beginning to look at things regionally and to express accountability regionally and put pressure on the local regional directors rather than at the local authority level now. Chair.
I think we certainly see it as a partnership with the department. In respect of the RISE, we're still awaiting further information to see how it will impact on our schools. At the moment, we know they've identified one of our high schools that they'll be working with, and that's all at this current time.
I think from a local authority perspective, I think we see everything as a partnership. One of the things that we would have always encouraged is the partnership between those organisations that have some kind of influence or impact on development in schools. So whether those be the teaching schools previously or the current teaching school hubs, one of the things that that we do is we kind of sit with them as this kind of strategic partners in terms of providing support for schools across the county. And so we don't see any kind of rivalry or competition. It's about what's in the best interests of schools and for the children in the county. So we'll take any opportunity to work in partnership with those that have capacity to provide that support.
Yeah, thanks very much. And just to stress the point, none of this is a criticism. It's Tim, you were trying to work together, aren't we, on this to come up with a solution. I mean, your honest sort of reflection of that this is a historical issue as well. I just get concerned about how can a scrutiny committee decide whether things are getting better or worse if we just see sort of one-off years. And if you, for example, turn around on the table with paragraph 13 and said, sorry, not 13, it's skipped the page, on paragraph 17, which is progress 8 minus 0.18, which is pretty grim. If you said to us, look, we're aiming to get to minus 0.1 for next year, we can't do that actually because progress isn't in place in 2025 or 2026 because of Key Stage 2 not happening. But certainly we could look at Attainment 8 and say, look, it's 43.9 in Staffordshire, the National's 46.4, the West Midlands is 44.5. We're going to at least go for the West Midlands 44.5. Then this time next year when we sat here, we can say, you said this and the relevant actions were taken, so let's compare that. I just think if we sit here next year and look at it and it's 43.9 or 44, so what? It becomes have the actions worked or not? Well, we're just sort of floating along, so that's why I'm saying that if you used the so what element, Tim, that you mentioned there, we can set targets, but so what? Well, that's where the category for concerns come in with the letters that you send out. Actually, if we're not seeing the improvements in the identified areas for the schools, that can be highlighted in those letters. Those governing bodies and academy boards should be responding to that. If they're not, then there is an issue. But I also get your team is very small, and I feel your pain on that one as the Director of Education of the Archdiocese. But I think there is a great point for you and for us to have key performance indicators with some level of action plan at the level that you can deliver, because you can't go into the school and do it for them, obviously. But even setting out, for example, at the meetings that you hold with schools, these are the actions, these are the foci that you will be looking at, just as you've done with attendance and absence, persistent absence, for example. That it just gives everybody a focus and ensures that this time next year we can really compare.
Councillor Wiseman.
Thank you. Different point now. Some of the areas that some of the borough areas, so Tamworth, Cannock Chase, some of East Staffs, look to be on the data. I'm going to find you the page in a minute. I've gone. Table 17. And you can see that the districts are kind of set out for you, which is very helpful. Tamworth seems to be a huge outlier, especially on the combined score at Key Stage 2. So 50 compared to most are certainly over 60. And there are a couple of other districts as well that are kind of not doing particularly well. Could you put your finger on the reason why that's the case? Is it a, shall we say, a cultural issue? And I'm referring perhaps to males, white males in that particular area who may not have the support that they require, either by the school or by parents or whatever it might be. I just wonder what your views are on that. Thank you.
My understanding of the lower performing data is more of a contextual issue, so to do with areas of deprivation, more disadvantaged pupils. What I haven't given is any contextual information, so the number of boys in those areas compared to girls, or the percentage of deprivation as well. But that's my understanding behind that.
When we come on to the second part of this morning's agenda, you'll see that the exclusion data also shows that some of those worst performing areas are the same areas. So it does reflect on lack of education for some of those pupils and the reasons why we're looking at that.
Reverend Metcalfe.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a follow-up on my first part of what I was speaking about the transition to higher education apprenticeships and further education.
So we haven't bought the Key Stage 5 performance. Key Stage 5 performance, again, is mixed. So what we see is a slight improvement compared with what's happening nationally. However, what is far better are those youngsters that are what we classed as not in education, employment or training. So we use the language NEET, but that is below the national average. So in terms of where youngsters go on to further education or into training, then those that are not in any of those is much lower than the national average. And then by the age of 19, those that have the at least a level 2 is well above the national average. So you can see that actually, and then going into work, again, we've got our destinations are better than what's happening regionally and nationally.
That's very encouraging, Chair. Thank you very much.
Councillor Dr Johnny McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. I raised this at the pre-scrutiny meeting, and I just want to raise it formally. What is recruitment like for teachers in Staffordshire? Certainly for primary care, it's harder by virtue of the fact it's rural, and it's much better in larger conurbations. And I just wonder what is done about it, and whether it's just left to the individual academies or maintained schools. I've read with some interest over the past few years columns written by a woman called Lucy Kellaway. And what she did was she was a journalist, a financial journalist, and then moved to teaching. And she started this voluntary organisation called Now Teach. And my experience at school, and I'm just reflecting what Connor said about the fact that there was something just not quite there about the ambition with children in Staffordshire. My experience at school was that those that were that really encouraged you to be ambitious were those that brought what they brought into teaching in the first place, what they did beforehand. And her voluntary organisation called Now Teach, it encourages people who have maybe done X number of years doing something, and they want to do something different, maybe contribute more or whatever, and they go into teaching. And that voluntary organisation is there to encourage that. Now, it just strikes me in a place like Tamworth and Cannock, which the figures show aren't great, that having teachers that have done something particularly different and aren't just those who've gone school, university and back to school again, could be really quite helpful, because I think they do bring something special to offer. And the kids recognise that and recognise it quickly. I'd like your views.
Councillor Price.
Well, I recognise nationally that there is a struggle for some schools to recruit teaching staff, and particularly those passionate teaching staff in those areas where they're needed more than others. That can be difficult. This is something that concerns me, and I wanted to do a piece of work really to see what areas, particularly those more deprived areas, whether we got those lower numbers or more difficulty recruiting. However, I've been really fortunate, particularly with this portfolio, to visit quite a lot of schools, along with some of my colleagues as well. And I do ask this question when I visit these schools: how are you finding recruitment? There are very few schools that come back and say we're struggling, particularly those strong multi-academy trusts as well, where you can move staff from one place to another when you require it, and those skills move as well. But actually, they're not struggling with recruitment, perhaps as much as maybe nationally. So I need to understand myself whether that is a significant problem within Staffordshire. But as I said, I've met quite a lot of head teachers over the past 4 years, but the past 12 months, particularly post-pandemic, I was extremely concerned about recruitment. I don't feel the picture within Staffordshire is as bad as other areas. Not to say that there isn't a problem around recruitment, but I think our schools are faring better, and Staffordshire schools do provide a good quality of education, and people want to come to Staffordshire and work in our schools. So maybe we need to just have a look and maybe some better engagement with schools, particularly our academies, to just readdress that question perhaps, and how are you finding things with the recruitment. My officers may know more than I do on this subject, but these are the views and the things that I've seen myself while visiting schools. And I am waffling slightly, I apologise, but visiting schools for me is one of the key roles of this portfolio, because when you speak to heads and staff on the ground, it's the best way to understand what is actually going on within our schools in this county. And there's a lot of hard work going on. Our schools, despite some of the figures you see here, particularly around attainment and progress, are working extremely hard to give the best quality of education they can within our county.
That's heartening, but good can always be better. And it strikes me that those that have done something do bring something special. And if it increases the competition for teacher places, then I think it ought to be considered, because it's our youngsters at the end of the day.
Our only direct involvement in recruitment is I will attend all the head teacher interviews for maintained schools, which is a privilege to attend, to see young, enthusiastic people at the start of that leadership career. We have managed to recruit to all those posts. It can be challenging, and some of those, there's not always a clear story why it's challenging. It can be the time of the year, the post, the size of the school, but we have managed to fill all those vacancies when they've arisen.
Tim?
Yeah, and just comes back to, I think, Reverend Metcalfe's question around that kind of partnership working. So, you know, I'm by no means taking any credit for this at all, other than to say that as part of the Teaching School Hub's work, there is some work around initial teacher training. There is also the work around the understanding where the cold spots are across the county in terms of people coming in to teach. and there's an organisation that's called STEC, which is the Stoke and Staffordshire Teacher Education Consortium. And again, we sit as part of that organisation, and we're looking, particularly, Johnny, in terms of encouraging people into the teaching profession that have already got degrees. And so it's around thinking around how you do an apprenticeship in teaching to come into the education system. I guess I'm not as probably as confident as Jonathan is in terms of the recruitment, because actually for some roles that it is incredibly difficult, and particularly in the secondary sector, and particularly with some of those kind of specialist subject areas. I do agree, though, in terms of the point Jonathan made around the Multi-Academy Trust, and again, some of their greater capacity, because actually what that does is it kind of keeps people within the organisation, and they've got kind of that, some of that promotional, and be able to promote people into different roles and responsibilities. And where we've got small standalone schools, probably in the future will start to struggle in terms of some of that recruitment because of the attraction of others. So actually it is a challenge, and it will continue to be a challenge, but there are things that are taking place. Only this week I had a conversation with our comms team around how we can start to promote the work of STEC, and that I think the earn while you learn and become a qualified teacher. So.
Now venturing onto territory I know nothing about, excuse me. But I know that London went from the worst area in the country to the best, and much of that is attributable to one figure. Was his name Brighouse or something like that? Yeah. I think it just highlights how good quality visionary people can really make a difference. And we want to be the best.
Can I also add to that resource? So it was called the London Challenge. So, and then we tried to move into the National Challenge, but actually what happened was resource. And, you know, I'm kind of going to look at Steve in the sense of, because one of his former roles was as part of a teaching school hub. And what we had in Stoke was a priority education investment area. And the challenge for us in Staffordshire is that we surround Stoke, and we have youngsters who are kind of crossing the borders, and to some extent we're always trying to kind of hang on to the outskirts of what was going on in Stoke, that we could use it. But actually there was a resource for London, and it was the London Challenge.
I need to just check my figures. Were we the 14th lowest funded area from a fairer funding point of view? I know London's substantially better funded than we are, so with more money, you know, you can recruit better. So a lot of it is down to funding, but Tim will probably correct my figures.
No, I think you're right, Jonathan. We're 138th out of 152 in terms of the kind of per pupil funding. It's in your appendices.
As a former governor of a Catholic school which became an academy, I was a local authority governor. And there were other governors who were parents, outside influences really, who hadn't been teachers. And I believe we added things to it. Now as academisation, where you have the board, etc., there's little outside influence to look at what's going on inside the school. Do you think that's had an effect on some of the academies?
Clearly, in terms of the governance arrangements, it's set out in, again, legislation that as a maintained school, you have to have a certain criteria of governors, proportions of parents, the proportion of community or co-opted governors, a local authority governor. But in terms of the arrangements for academies, it isn't the same. However, what I would say is the vast majority of certainly academies across Staffordshire will still have those local academy councils, local governing bodies, whatever they call them, that still have that representation from the local community. So again, I don't see that as a particular challenge. I think if that is the case, then I think people should be raising it with us, and we'll be raising it with the regional director if there isn't that kind of local community involvement. Because I would expect academies recognise the value in having their community as part of what's going on locally.
Yeah, I've not seen it as a particular challenge with these schools. I mean, I was a chair of governors. I think Tim is a chair of governors. No, not chair. He was, sorry. And I know that you were really passionate as well with the school that you were working at. I still get requests on a weekly basis from people who want to be local authority governors. So from our own maintained schools, we still have those governing bodies in place. And again, when I visit academies, I talk about the governance there as well, and they do still have that sort of lower tier of governance within the school from parents and external bodies. So at the moment, it's not, or I haven't seen that as a particular challenge, so it's good to see.
Councillor Kath Perry.
Thank you. I just wanted to reiterate, excuse me, losing my voice, that you're right, we do still have that outside influence on academies from parents, etc. So, you know, it hasn't changed as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
I've got one final question from the other vice chairman. She asked it at the meeting we had online. Is there any guidance for how schools spend pupil premium, or has the guidance changed in the last couple of years? There are now less teaching assistants in classes as many schools reduce in numbers. So who will there be to assist the class teacher with disrupted, undiagnosed or SEND pupils?
There still is guidance in terms of how you spend, too many S's there, how you spend your pupil premium. There's still an expectation that you have a pupil premium document to show that. What is noticeable, though, over the last few years in terms of Ofsted inspections is that there's a lot less focus on disadvantaged pupils. It's hardly ever referenced these days in inspection reports. And what we pick up from schools is there's very little focus on disadvantaged pupils in terms of that pupil premium spend.
Steve?
Obviously, though, the new proposed framework is absolutely inclusion first, front and centre. So I think that will come back. And I also think as well, just picking up the point about good and outstanding, which is great, but the current framework, as you know, isn't focusing on outcomes. And I think the new one very much will be focused on academic outcomes. So again, it reinforces the need for us to be on top of this. So I think if you can reflect on that would be good.
Can I just respond? And totally,
of course,
totally agree in terms of the new inspection framework and the focus around inclusion. The challenge, though, and I would challenge anybody to give us what the department's definition of inclusion is. One of the challenges we face is that every school leader and every academy trust and every maintained school will say we're an inclusive school. The challenge we have is what are we measuring that against? So what is our definition of inclusion? And for me, the challenge back is, from a departmental perspective, so the Department for Education, until you can define and tell us this is what we're all going to be judged on around inclusion, there are still fear for what Ofsted are going to be looking at around that inclusion measure. So I totally, we want all of our schools. For me, it should be, quite clearly is the school at the heart of the community. But
yeah, I fully agree with not only about outcomes but around inclusion as well. And every time we have this sort of similar conversation, I always say the same thing, which is not always popular with some schools, of course, but some of our best performing multi-academy trusts are the least exclusive schools I have seen across the county. And you visit schools that are fully inclusive, and although they may not be gaining those sort of top figures that you would like to see and outstripping performance, what they are doing is giving a good quality of education for the most vulnerable within their schools, and I commend that. And I would like to see, and I hope that the new Ofsted framework will sort of be more focused on that. It says it will, but not necessarily the case. So it is a very, very fine line, and Tim is absolutely right. I look at I speak to schools on a regular basis, and we have some outstanding schools and some excellent inclusive schools across the county. But you speak to some who say, you know, we are fully inclusive. Look at the things we're doing. You know, we've got great results, great figures. And then you look at exclusions, and they've offloaded 3 children the week before. So for me, inclusion is very grey area, and Tim is right. What do we class? What do we level? What do we call the level of what is acceptable inclusion? And that's the challenge we still continue to face.
Thank you for that. Just on the point of inclusion, obviously we are all facing the challenge of SEND, and I know that the schools are having a percentage taken off them for the high needs block for Staffordshire, and I think that's the first time that's happened. It's not the first time. Okay. I'm being told by some Staffordshire schools that their per pupil funding has effectively reduced. Is that correct? Because I'm just again thinking about how are they going to address some of these issues if their per pupil funding is reducing because of effectively top slicing? But please, that clarification on that would be great.
So the first thing is that it gives me the real good opportunity to say that what we are going to be doing, and picking up on a point before, is meeting with all school education leaders to say we're going to have a conference around inclusion and what do we mean by inclusion. So in the absence of the department saying this is what we think inclusion is, we're going to kind of set that out, but it will be with our schools and education leaders to say, yes, we're all signed up to this. Coming back to your second point, though, so the thing Steve's talking about is a request to switch 0.5% of the school's block budget to the high needs block budget. And so schools for... Pardon? 0.5. 0.5%. So... as Jonathan says, 3.3 million for 25-26. It's not the first time. It's the second consecutive year. So we did it in 24-25, and we did it in 19-20. I think there was an earlier period in time as well. But I just want to provide some reassurances that as part of our commitment to receive that, we gave a commitment to the department and the Education and Skills Funding Agency that said we will meet all minimum funding guarantees. So the minimum funding that is required will be honoured. All schools will receive, as set out in the legislation, and the guidance says that we can set a minimum funding guarantee between minus 0.5% and 0.5%. And we're setting our minimum funding guarantee at the highest level. So all of our schools will get a minimum funding guarantee of 0.5%. In essence, what it means is it caps the gain, Steve. So what we're actually doing is there will be some schools that won't be affected by that 0.5% switch because they are actually at that floor. What we do is we're capping at the top end. And so it means that I think from memory, and I will correct it if it's wrong for the minutes, but from memory, I think we're capping it somewhere around 0.76%. So there shouldn't be anybody that gets less than the 0.5% MFG per pupil, not necessarily numbers. It's about based on per pupil.
And of course, this also forms part of our deficit management plan, which I'm sure you're aware of. And we're forecast, I think, at the moment to be £55 million in debt on the high needs block through the DSG. Is that right, Tim?
DSG deficit is 55
yeah,
at the end of this year.
It'll be a combined £55 million. And you've probably seen the forecast for 27-28, which could be in excess of 100 to 150 million pounds in debt. So we have to provide a deficit management plan, and that's part of the reason that not only did we do that, but because we had a good deficit management plan, the DFE and the Educational Skills Funding Agency supported that as well. So that's why we got it, but I know you understand.
Just in respect of Ofsted and inclusion, for every maintained school while they are being inspected, we have a conversation with the lead inspector. So we don't just talk about results, we give them our view, how inclusive the school is. So we'll talk about maybe attendance, exclusions, their involvement with sending inclusion hubs. So they get a clear view from the local authority about how we view the school performance. Unfortunately, we don't have that opportunity when it's an academy. They don't speak to the local authority. So our view of how inclusive an academy is, we wouldn't give that view, which from my point of view would be helpful at times.
Can I thank Councillor Price, Mr Daniels, Mr Moss, Mr Marsden for the excellent debate we've had today, really, in discussion. I'd like to finish with one comment. My daughter is a teacher in Cannock, in a school in the deprived part of Cannock, and when she used to live at home, I'd watch her doing her reports, marking, etc. I'd say, that's a bit low. He says, Dad, when he came into my class, he was down here. He's now midway through. He's made such a great improvement, and that's why I'm a teacher, to change people's ability to go through life. And if we can just all keep doing that together, we'll get there eventually. So thank you very much for your time and for the work you do on behalf of everybody. Okay, folks, we're going to start as it's 10 past. Can I welcome Carl on board now as the fifth member of the team? Item 5, school absenteeism and exclusions. Report of the Cabinet Member for Education and Send. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman, and yeah, I'm really pleased to bring this to you today. I find it really valuable bringing these kind of subjects to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, particularly as you've requested information around, and this is a word I struggle with, and I don't know who put this in the document, absenteeism and exclusions. I'm just going to remind you that when I say schools, we mean schools and academies, of course, and you would have seen a great deal of interest in school attendance. Only this week, national reports have been published about the impact of absenteeism on the outcomes for children and young people. You saw in my last report the gap between the performance of those children and young people identified as disadvantaged and their peers, sorry. If children are absent from school, this gap is only going to get wider, of course. The report today has set out the duties of schools and the local authority in promoting regular school attendance. And towards the end of the report, there is a reference to the campaigns we have or are developing to promote attendance. This is great, but for some this isn't enough, and as schools and the council and their duties, we have to take where school attendance is as good as it should be, all the things that we need to take, sorry. Quite often from a safeguarding aspect, you will hear a comment that school is a protective factor. This means the school should be a safe place for children who are at risk of being harmed, exploited or drawn into antisocial or criminal activities. For this to be the case, children absolutely need to be attending school. The document contained within the appendices shows that whilst attendance across Staffordshire is generally okay and above the national averages for some groups of children, there are more worrying trends of absenteeism. Although improving from last year, we still have too many children who don't have a school attendance habit. I'm sure you have a number of questions about attendance and absenteeism. This is something that as a Cabinet we are concerned about and will continue to receive regular updates as part of the corporate delivery plan. I also need to talk about school exclusions, and again this is featured this week in the national news. The report again highlights the different responsibilities a school and council has with dealing with exclusions. You will see within the appendices that there is an increased trend in permanent exclusions. In fact, exclusions across Staffordshire, as with the rest of the county, are higher than pre-pandemic levels, and they are continuing to increase. Again, I expect you have a number of questions about exclusions and how we are working with our education colleagues to support these children who, as I have said previously, are some of our most vulnerable children. So I will stop there and give opportunity, of course, for the panel to ask questions about these two really important topics, which, of course, is school exclusions and absenteeism. Thank you.
I'll ask one question on behalf of the chairman who's not here, really. I know years ago we asked that these two reports be separate, attainment and exclusions. As we're now saying, as we all we really have, attainment and exclusions go hand in hand. If people don't go to school, they don't attain. Should we consider for the future bringing the two reports together and have one report that covers the whole lot, or is it best, in your views, to keep it separate?
I actually think it works in its current format, so we can separate the two items, but as we said in the first item, we referred back to this item following on, so they are separate, and I would prefer it this way. I mean, I will take advice from my officers, but I think this is the best way to report it.
Thank you, Chair. I've read through the report, and it's very satisfying, if you like. I can't see that the head teacher has anything that you've left out that he hasn't done, and he can do. I can't find anywhere in the report, and if I've missed it, I apologise. In the report about what stage does this happen before the head teacher invites the parents or the guardian in to discuss this child. or the children that has this problem. If it's in the report, gentlemen, I'm sorry I didn't see it. Thank you, Chair.
It's a good question, and it wasn't in the report. There's an incredible amount of detail that one can go into about what should happen before a child is excluded. So one of the main reasons why children are excluded from school is a category we call persistent disruptive behaviour. So often the child within the school has been on a journey with the school and the parent, one hopes, where there will be numerous meetings in school to discuss what the triggers to the child's behaviour might be, how they could be addressed. One would always hope that they'd included assessments to see if the child had any learning needs or had any social, emotional, mental health needs, to see if they were contributing factors to their disruption that they cause, or misbehaviour, or inability to conform to the school's boundaries. So all along, there should be lots of opportunities for those conversations to take place. And most schools have an escalation process where it starts with the class teachers, subject teachers, escalates to whether it's a head of year or head of pastoral care, SENCO, Special Education Needs Coordinator, and then comes up through the school's leadership team, through deputy head and head teacher. So there are lots of different mechanisms that schools have, but they should all have that, I suppose we call it a graduated process. The only exception to that, just to point out, is if a serious incident occurs in school. So if there was a very serious incident that might be out of character for the children involved, but nevertheless it was so serious, the head teacher felt he had no option but to exclude. That would be the only instance where there might not be any history of parental involvement, because it's kind of jumped all that to a serious incident, a one-off we call it.
Thank you very much. That's very satisfying to hear that. But in the media today, we're getting more and more aware of children that are carrying knives and things about with them. I don't know, maybe these children have had a problem in school in order for them to do this sort of thing or to carry these weapons. Have you come across that with our schools? And if so, what are you doing about it?
I mean, I can talk of a couple of examples. Obviously, I can't mention names or schools because that would be highly inappropriate, but there was one incident where a child had taken a craft knife out of school, was pretending to cut somebody with it without the blade actually being out. Now, for me, that was a stupid one-off mistake that should have been dealt with by the school but not permanently excluded. However, they did permanently exclude that child, and then they moved her to another school. So I've come across that. I've come across another incident when a child has deliberately come in with a inappropriate, well, not any knife is inappropriate within the school setting, and they found themselves permanently excluded, and they have had to go through a managed move. So yeah, we have come across it. They are small incidents, and I'm not suggesting that we are comparable with some of those inner city areas that have knife crime within the school. And then there are other incidents as well, not necessarily knife. I had a pupil the other day, he'd got 138 incidences of bad behaviour within the school, and the school had tried everything through fixed term exclusions. They had the parents in, support, and ultimately they permanently excluded him because of disruptive behaviour within the class. So every child there are different levels. I think our schools do a good job around permanent exclusion. I do feel that some of these cases, this is a personal opinion, this is not an opinion of the council, where actually the school should take a bit more of another look at the circumstances, put some restorative practice in, and actually try and keep that child within the school setting, because permanent exclusion is not going to support a child going forward. But when there are those really serious or severe cases that the school feels they have absolutely no alternative and there was another case some time ago where we had I can't remember, it was a couple of pupils had deliberately waited for another pupil to come out and had premeditated, targeted and could have nearly killed a child, permanent exclusion, and then obviously things put in place for those children. So every case is an individual case, and it's based on the merits and what the school can do to support them, but you can't always do that.
Sometimes a child that isn't making progress at school with his lessons, sometimes it's a cry for help from that child. And as his years go on, his behaviour, whatever sex it is, get worse. Is there some form of something in our schools, some person in our schools that take this on, like people from social services, or have we got something in the bag to bring forward for a child that has consistently misbehaved? Sometimes it's the child that's got dyslexic or something like that, but have we got something in the programme, and it isn't in here because I've looked for it, that we can put forward to say that child's in that class, we need to do that for him because he's following in that routine?
There is an awful lot that schools can do and we can do to support them, and I'm going to hand over to Carl to talk about that in a minute. I've passed the buck, but I also want to talk about the work that the Alternative Provision Panel does on Tuesday mornings. He used to meet, I assume still meeting on Tuesday mornings, where children with high levels of fixed term exclusions or are on the cusp of permanent exclusion or have been permanently excluded, and what we do and what Carl's team does to support those pupils and trying to get them back into education. So I will default to Carl on that.
Just come before Carl does. Because of my legal background at the school I was at, I think I chaired 10 or 12 exclusion panels. An exclusion panel basically is, Janet, Cancer England. The head teacher makes that decision, but then the governing body actually reviews that decision to make sure it's right. And they go through everything, and that's happened to that child really since the time they came into the school. You go through everything. Have they had a managed moved? You go through all the work with the school social workers. Everything that's on there, you review it. And there's a set time limit how long you have to do it, where the notice has to be served, everything. It's
That's fine, because all
let me just finish this first, please. No, Councillor, please let me finish. Can you turn your microphone off? Thank you. And that's the way you have to do it. A child is not excluded on a willy-nilly thing. That's all I'm going to say, really. It is well documented. There is then, if the child is excluded by that panel, then there's an appeal where they can have legal representative, everything. Decisions are made, really, to protect the school and all the other children in the school, and also that child, to try and prevent them offending again, but also to improve their education for the future. That's what it's all about. Thank you.
I think Councillor Eagland's point, I may have muddied the water slightly, but I think what you were trying to say was, you know, if there's a child, particularly with SEND needs, that hasn't been picked up, but there is ongoing issues, and their exclusion is on the back of things that should have been put in place by the school or support from the county first.
So just to expand on Councillor Price's point, that there are lots of things on offer to schools, and the chair explained really well the process once it's gone past the head teacher. My staff currently, when a child is excluded, I have a team of really experienced staff, and they will phone the head teacher, and they will have what we call a high support, high challenge conversation. So they're not there to criticise the head teacher's decision. That's their right to make that decision. What they're there to do is, if you like, a bit of the function of what the governors will do later is to say to the head, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? You know, when you've had the parents in, what did you discuss? Have you looked at the child's academic progress? Does it indicate they might have some special or additional needs? So they do all that work with the head. Now, on the majority of instances, to be fair, the head will come back with a very robust and comprehensive answer. But there are situations where to the head's credit, they will say, do you know what, I haven't tried that, you know, and I think I'll give that a go. And we call that a rescind. So the head teacher has the power, upon reflection, before it goes to governors, to say, do you know what, I could try something else. Sometimes that might be phoning up another school and saying, we call them managed moves, look, this young man's made a terrible mistake in my school, could he have a fresh start in yours? And let's try that. And they'll try that. There are things we call, I'm sure you've heard lots about it in other meetings and forums, restorative and relational practice. And we really push that with all our schools. A lot of our schools are embracing it. I've told the story before about a group of girls who ganged up on one girl. Very unfortunate situation. But then we did what's called a restorative conference, where we got all the girls in the room together. And we talked about how the victim expressed how she felt. The perpetrators listened to that, and they expressed, well, you know, their lack of understanding. And actually that group of girls went on to be friends collectively, and they actually wanted to know more about restorative processes and become ambassadors for their school, because they thought it was a really good idea. So we push that. There's what we call the Send and Inclusion Hubs, which is an external group of, it's an external meeting to the school where schools gather together to give peer support to each other. So you could, with permission of the parent, you can take a child to that room, I'll use my name, so you can say, Carl Hobson, you know, he's having trouble in school, he's very disruptive, or he's crying a lot when he comes to school, he gets very distressed. Now, other schools will then say, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Or we found this really useful. So they'll go away with ideas about what they can do. And then, of course, Councillor's already mentioned it, I think, in the previous session, there's the enhanced assess, plan, do, review pathway. So that can be offered to schools. That's additional support to schools with children with special needs. Or the CDIS, which I forget what it stands for, Tim.
Staffordshire Education District.
So it's the Staffordshire Enhanced District Inclusion Support.
Thank you. There's so many acronyms in our job. So that's another venture that's been set up by the County Council in collaboration and partnership with schools, and that's an additional resource. So, and there's loads. I could literally go on. So it's our job to make sure that in the head teacher's busy day, they've considered all those options. Because if we can deflect the permanent exclusion, then we will. Because the impact of a permanent exclusion on a child is significant. So we try and reduce that if we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really satisfied with that reply. I just wanted confidence to say we got a safety net, and you've more than assured me of it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bell.
Thank you very much. So, again, thank you for the report. One of the things I'm curious about is, has there been any analysis done about the effectiveness of strategies such as managed moves and indeed fair access data? So, for example, are there some schools that take more of their fair share of fair access?
The answer is, in respect to managed moves, no. And there's a reason for that. Because schools do managed moves between themselves all the time. And that's absolutely fine. We encourage that because that's good practice. So we as a local authority don't have the full picture of managed moves across the county. Now, that could be an area we could look at. We've tried in the past to say to schools, if you're going to do a managed move, please let us know. But, you know, you've worked in education, you still work in education, you know that every time we ask schools to tell us something, it feels like another burden we're putting on them. And actually, it does work. It works for some children, but not for others. We could look at that in more depth. That's definitely an area to explore. I don't manage the fair access process, but I'm she's one of my colleagues, and I know that she has done some work on the fair access process and the analysis of that data. So whilst I can't answer your question, I believe there may be an answer to that question out there, Andrew. I know you manage my colleague.
Yeah, so Samantha Nichol manages the fair access process, and I know there are from time to time questions about the fairness in terms of distribution of children that are hard to place among schools, and Sam has demonstrated over the years and with evidence that there is a fair distribution of children across schools, even though as an individual school you might feel like you've taken one too many, but you know, Sam is absolutely, yeah, really strict at making sure that everyone has the fair share. I'm happy to share data with schools about demonstrating exactly how that works.
I think it would be very useful to share that data with this committee and also with schools for transparency, because there is that perception that, you know, it's us again. And I think, Carl, that point about managed moves, it would be very useful to do that. Thank you.
So I guess just a challenge back then, Steve, in terms of supporting us gathering. Yeah, but supporting us in gathering that information, because actually what we need is a kind of a full picture. If we're going to do it, we need to do it correct, and we need to get the kind of the full picture, particularly around kind of the managed moves side of it. Could I just pick up on the point around the kind of all of the kind of either managed moves, fair access, and certainly you will have heard about the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. And a particular aspects to that are providing some additional levers and some responsibilities to local authorities in terms of all schools, whether they're maintained schools or academies. But I guess, and it comes back to something, Reverend Metcalf mentioned earlier on around, we want to do this in partnership with schools. And so whilst Carl, we'll talk around, the FAP process, actually, if we can do things without having to kind of apply the FAP process and say, you're going to have this youngster, actually, it's more successful. And similarly, that's why managed moves work when schools do it themselves, because they're doing it in that partnership arrangement rather than us having to rely on a piece of legislation that says you're going to have, because one of the things we recognise is that if that's what we apply and we continue to force, then quite often sometimes the relationship will break down and it won't be as successful as if we've done it in partnership.
Thanks, Tim. In my experience, sadly, some schools use managed moves as a tick box exercise prior to permanent exclusion to say that they've done it. I've seen pupils that have landed on schools' doorsteps without any kind of explanation of their background, of what triggers them to poor behaviour, etc. So I think maybe some reissuing of guidance regarding managed moves and the effectiveness and the expectation around those would be useful, because we shouldn't be using children as pawns to just use as a checklist to say, well, we've done that.
That's a very good point and valid, and we do have guidance on managed moves, but it does need updating. We recognise that, so we are looking to do that. I also should just point out that some districts, I think Lichfield springs to mind, have themselves as a group of schools started to write their own managed move policy, because they recognise the value of it, but I absolutely agree it has to be with a level of support, because we know in our world, if somebody just took you from your workplace and said, well, I'm going to put you in a different workplace, off you go, as adults we'd struggle. So as children, to just be lifted from one school, often in difficult circumstances, and be placed in another can be equally challenging, and I agree. They can fail quite quickly. So I think schools do know that it needs more support. So hopefully we can move that forward and come up with a better, more supportive policy. But as Tim says, it has to be done in partnership with the schools, because there's no new money to support this. It's about using existing resources and existing good practice effectively to support these vulnerable children.
I was going to ask a very similar question to Tim there, really. I think the most I ever saw was 4 managed moves for one child. And it was as if they were just trying to buy time, like 6 weeks here, 6 weeks there. Because I think after the first managed move, if the behaviour continues, really, then you, in a way, you know it's not the school. It's the pupil themselves. And if you do it again and again, and then when they come back, well, you're through half the teaching year then, really, is the way to put it. And then you have to go into the exclusion process, really. And I think really for the child itself, it may have been better to start that at the start, when you can do some permanency for the child. But my second question really is, people referral, the PRUs, really, best way to put it. Do we think we've got enough facilities across our county, particularly now in relation to, so we've got a primary PRU? Do we have enough? I know the cost is extortionate, really, but is there any way we can improve what we got so we can get more people perhaps into PRUs? And then do we have a figure for the amount of people who go from PRUs back into mainstream education at all? Or just a rough percentage? I mean, I don't need definite figures.
So in terms of the number of PRUs that really should be referred to as short stay schools, and really should be short stay schools. So, and we have 6 of those across the county. 2 of those operate across a double district. The Bailey Street PRU that's in Stafford actually provides that provision for Stafford and South Staffs, and then similarly Cedars in Newcastle provides that across Newcastle and the Moorlands. Have we got enough of it? Then I would say if we were using it as we should, then there is enough provision. In some local authorities, they don't have any pre-provision at all. It's all managed within schools. Currently, though, all of our pre-provision is completely full, and it's full of permanently excluded youngsters. Our intention and hope is that actually that they provide that early intervention, and it comes back to Councillor Eagland's question around have we got kind of some safety nets around some of these youngsters. If we were using the short stay schools for their intention, for some intensive support for those youngsters so that they could go back into and return to their mainstream school, then that would be the ideal. So the honest answer is no, there isn't enough currently because we are struggling because of the number of youngsters that have been permanently excluded. However, if it was used for the intention that we would want it to be, then there is enough of that provision.
Is there any way we can go into what it should be? I mean, how we can take it back to where, when it was all set up, what we should be doing, or are we too far down the line now from that?
Carl will say a few more words than I on this potentially, but I visited pretty much all the PRUs across Staffordshire. One of the main things that I've come across is that a lot of the children, I've given this example before. I mean, I visited one in the north of the county, and I asked the head, you know, should these pupils be here? Well, half of them should absolutely be here. The other half, I'm working on educational healthcare plans who should have been picked up much earlier. And that's some of the work we're doing around the CEDAS model and that EA PDR work to support those pupils earlier interventions, so that later on down the system they do not appear within our pupil referral units. Tim is absolutely right, of course, they were supposed to be a short-term provision, but once you sort of hit year 10 and 11, it's very difficult to get those pupils back into a mainstream setting. I visited another PRU about 3 weeks ago and asked that similar question as well. How many of your pupils have you managed to get into back into mainstream? The answer was 1. So yeah, there is more work for us to do. There are pupils in the PRU that absolutely shouldn't be there and would free up room for those children who need that support through the pupil referral unit. Yes, I would love to see some of these children back in mainstream rather than spending what you would consider the last of their education in a pupil referral unit. And I think that's something that we need to do some more work on and look around what we can do. But as I've said, we are doing a lot more early intervention work. I place a lot of faith in the CEDAS model, the EA PDR, and all the work that Carl has talked about as well, to make sure that we cut this off before we end up down the permanent exclusion route and have children in pupil referral units.
One positive thing to be remiss of us to not talk about today is an innovative project we've had going for several years now called the Progress Centre. So this is an alternative to a pupil referral unit, and we have a school in Cannock which hosts our Progress Centre for us. And how it works is if a child is excluded from school and it's normally what we call a one-off serious incident. So it's the boy who took his scout knife in to show his friends and ended up being permanently excluded. It's the child who maybe, wrongly took a small amount of cannabis into school. The head teacher in those instances often has no alternative but to permanently exclude the child because they've been very public about their breach of the school rules. So they have to be shown to be robust in their response. So with those children, rather than them going to a pupil referral unit, we send them to our Progress Centre. And the way our Progress Centre works quite uniquely is it's a separate classroom within this reasonably large school. They take the children in, they do some assessments with them, they talk to them about why they've ended up there, and they look at, the sort of, we call it ABC, what happened before, what happened during, what happened after. They do all that work with them. And when the child is showing willingness to, go back to the classroom, they become a member of the wider school population. So they might start going, first of all, to the lessons they enjoy, maths, art, etc. And eventually they go back to a full-time timetable. Maths, I know. I used to like math. Anyway, so once they're back in the full-time timetable, we give them a 12-week period. Usually it's achieved within that 12-week period. The host school will write that child a school report to say they go to all these lessons and this is their behaviour. We use that report to then go to one of their local schools to say, look, this child genuinely made a mistake, they genuinely are remorseful and they want to come back. Now, of those students, I haven't got the absolute data for this year, but I know last year we had above 90% success rate. So they were going back into school, they were becoming completely integrated, they were not getting other exclusions or suspensions, and they were achieving. So that project works really well, but it works well with a very small group of children. Most children are excluded from school for accumulative behaviour, but it was our answer, and I think a very good answer, and one that's proven itself to work over and over again. For the child who's made the one-off serious mistake, is genuinely remorseful, we get them back that way. The other thing, just to say, is that I've recently done a paper and been able to secure 2 extra members of staff who respond to school exclusions. And the purpose of employing these staff, I've only got the funding for 12 months, but the purpose of the funding and the staff is to try and get more capacity to do preventative work. My staff are experts at preventative work, but they haven't got enough capacity to get in front of the train, if you use that expression. So we're hoping with this little bit of capacity, we're able to show pre-pandemic, exclusions in Staffordshire were going down. Year on year, they were going down. Post-pandemic, they are going up. And that's really interesting because our attendance is bucking the other trend. Nationally, we know attendance is getting worse. In Staffordshire, we're bucking that trend because our attendance is getting better. But the thing we're not better at in Staffordshire is managing these children. So we want to get ahead of the problem, and things that have been mentioned, CDIS, EAPDR, they're all part of our toolkit to get ahead. Thank you.
Awesome.
It would be remiss of me not to talk about the scheme that Carl has set up that we're running, which is the Little Heroes campaign. I don't know if you saw my ugly mug on TV the other day talking about it, but I did want... fair enough. You've got better things to do than watching telly, but that's one of the schemes that we've put in place to support attendance within primary school settings. And I don't know what the latest figures are today, but we've had a substantial increase in primary schools taking this on board. It has been shown to increase or attendance, and it has a really positive impact, not only on the pupils, of course, but parents who've struggled to get their children into school with, you know, mild learning difficulties or SEMH challenges. I mean, Carl, maybe, in fact, I would like Carl to say a few words on this scheme, because I wanted to just highlight it today as one of the positive things that we have been doing.
The scheme has been running for this school academic year. I believe it's something like 80+% of primary schools in Staffordshire have adopted the scheme. It's very colourful, it's very bright, it has two little cartoon sort of characters, a boy and a girl, and running through it is a supportive workbook for parents to go through with their own children about why they might not want to go to school that day. We were very clear that we didn't want to burden the school with yet another intervention. What we wanted to do was create an intervention that schools could give to parents to do with their children, and then they could bring that booklet into school, having completed it with the child, to say, look, this is why my child says he doesn't want to come to school. And we've had all kinds of answers from, you know, there's a baby in the house, and if I come to school, the baby gets more attention than me, to, you know, I don't like my teacher because she's asking me to spell words that I can't spell, which all children suffer from these anxieties, don't they? But it allows the teacher, the child and the school then to have a conversation. And the one thing that I've learnt more than anything else, children love a sticker. They absolutely love a sticker. I didn't think that they would. I've got my thing full of them. They absolutely love a sticker, and they get rewarded with these little simple stickers. And it's not a revelation. Primary schools have been doing it for years. But what the primary schools liked about our project was, everything we did was very high quality. So nothing was cheap photocopied stuff. It was really good high quality. Due to some funds that we had in at the time, we offered it free to all the schools. And we've offered support materials. We've got online materials. It's done really well. It's actually, I can't not mention it, won 2 awards. And it's up for its 3rd award. So it's going really well. Very last thing, I know time's precious, because I often get asked, are you doing anything for high schools? The answer is yes, we are. We have a project for high schools. I won't tell you about it because Councillor Price will get to launch it all magnificently some point in the future. But we do have a project for high schools as well. So, yeah.
If I may, Chair, just very quickly, I went into a primary school the other day, and there was a parent being nagged by the child about making sure that she was in school on time and that mum was slowing her down, and I like to hear that. I thought that was brilliant.
Can I thank you, Councillor Price, and your team? I think we've had a great debate this morning on both papers. Well worth having. But can I also thank the members of the committee, though, for asking the questions, because it takes 2 to tango, and I think together we've got some good answers, some great answers, and we know which way we're going forward. So thank you very much to everybody.
If I may just say, Chairman, excellent chairing as always, and thank you for the committee as well, because I thought there were some really, really good questions there. And I do want to just thank the officers as well, obviously Charles, Carl, Tim and Andrew. Thank you.
you, everybody. We'll now just go into item 6, the final item, the work programme.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this will be the last meeting now of this municipal year because the one on the 10th has been cancelled. So nothing to report particularly. It gives you an outline on the work programme of the work that's been completed. Obviously, that work will be reported in the Scrutiny annual report, which I hope you'll all be able to read whether or not you are here after the elections.
I would just like to say the 3 members who are here first, Councillor Eagland, Councillor Perry, Councillor McMahon. On behalf of the committee, thank you for all the work you've done over many years on this committee. The expertise you brought to it, the questioning, it's great to have sat beside you. I'm not sat here today, but normally I'll sit in the middle of you all. We work together as a team. We've not got today Councillor Jill Burnett-Faulkner, Councillor Gillian Padesi, Councillor Julia Jessel and Councillor Bob Spencer, who are all standing down from the council. You're standing? Yeah? Yeah, Councillor Connor's not standing down. No, we hope to come back to this committee. But for the expertise you brought and the time you've put in, can I thank you on behalf of the chairman who's not here himself today. And enjoy life after this, because there's plenty of life out there, as we all know. But and that, I will then call the meeting to a halt and thank everybody for attending today. And I think we've had a good morning, so thank you. Before you switch off, Simon, Helen is sat next to me, or she's sat next to Bob. Without Helen, over those 8 years I've sat on this committee at various times, we wouldn't have got to the end of any meeting. So, Helen, thank you very much for all the help you've given. I chaired one thing, Connor chaired another party before, an outside working body, if you remember. I think you actually wrote the documents for us, so thank you very much.